Hi there, I'm Mark Isero, and this is Article Club, where we read, annotate, and discuss one great article every month on race, education, or culture. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and I hope the end of your summer is progressing nicely. It's September, and this month we have been focusing on an outstanding article that was published a few months back in Literary Hub, also known as LitHub. It is a piece by Piers Gelly, and it is titled, What Happened When I Tried to Replace Myself with ChatGPT in My English Classroom? Now, if you've been following along lately at the articles I've been sharing here at the newsletter, you might know that I'm not a huge fan of when professors and teachers complain and lament about the rise of AI use among students. For me, it just doesn't seem helpful. It's here, we've got to deal with it. But at the same time, I get that artificial intelligence has changed education drastically, and it's no longer the good old days. And really, what are educators supposed to do? That's where this piece comes in. And when I read it, I was interested from the start. Author Piers Gelly is a professor at the University of Virginia, and instead of complaining all the time, he got curious. He brought ChatGPT to his students in his class. He really engaged his students in it, and this essay is a reflection on what he learned. One of my favorite parts about this article is how abundantly clear that Professor Gelly is a great teacher who cares deeply about his students. This is apparent right from the beginning and goes all the way throughout his essay. And I have to also say that it was clear in the conversation that I had with him a couple weeks ago, which you'll hear about in a few moments. I say this because when I asked Professor Gelly to come on the show, he replied, "Can I also ask some of my students too?" Of course, I said yes, and I was so happy to meet and talk to them because their perspectives are really what matter here. Their names are Camille Villalobos and Max Goldberg. They both go to the University of Virginia. They both took Professor Gelly's class, and they're both in the article, which I think is perfect. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Professor Gelly, Cam, and Max. Here we go. Well, I'm so excited to be here with you all. This is the first time ever actually at Article Club where there's been a group of us. And so just to make sure, let's get started actually, just to sort of like get our voices on there, first with Piers and then with Cam and Max. Can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Piers Skelly. I'm an assistant professor in the English department at the University of Virginia. I primarily teach writing courses there, and I'm based in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is where UVA is.
Hi, I'm Camille Villalobos, but I also go by Cam, which I'll be referred to in this podcast. I'm a second year student here at the University of Virginia, and I'm currently studying marketing and finance. And I'm so excited to be here.
I'm Max Goldberg, also second year at the University of Virginia. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I am undecided about what I'm going to major in, but I am also very excited to be here. I've never been on a podcast before, so first time for everything.
It's going to be great. I'm so excited to have you all here because when I read this piece, I've read all these articles about professors who are lamenting AI and what's going to happen and just like doing a lot of complaining. But Piers, your piece, like right from the beginning, grabbed me because it was something different. Like you actually wanted to engage your students in this experiment, actually have a real conversation with them. And you sort of took a risk a little bit. And so, Piers, can you talk about what you did? But also more importantly, like how'd you decide to do it? And for example, were you scared to like say, hey, I'm going to do this?
Well, I started this. Well, so I should say the essay came about after the course was over because I had decided that some things in the course were worth sharing for some of the reasons you alluded to, Mark. It began as a course because I had been hearing a lot from other faculty and graduate student instructors at UVA that they were getting a lot of AI use in their courses. My sense was that this was a large technological change that was occurring, and in order to keep up with it, I should try to educate myself about what AI can do well, what it can't do well. And I came up with the idea of framing it in the way that I did, like asking my students to assess whether the course itself was worthwhile in this day and age, because I'm always trying to find ways to get students to feel that there are real stakes to the course. I teach a lot of first year writing courses, and these are required courses. I think students often have mixed feelings about required courses. I certainly did when I was an undergrad. And so what I try to do is take the project of the course, which is I have a curricular obligation to teach the students about college level writing, but to frame it in a way where if you take as a premise that the college essay is not a form that exists in the wild, one that you're going to write and hopefully perfect in college, but maybe never touch again, I try to find ways to make it so that the students feel that the writing is going to matter in some way. And that often looks like allowing students quite a lot of leeway in terms of choosing topics that are important to them. It's also involved community partnerships, like working with local labor unions in the Charlottesville area and doing sort of collaborative writing projects that are in some way public facing. But for the purposes of this course, I kept it fairly simple, which is just to say, you all are college students here to learn about college level writing. And is this something you want right now? And that to me was a question that I felt I had some thoughts about. Like, I have thoughts about whether and how it's valuable to study writing, but I wanted to put it in the hands of the students because I genuinely didn't know what they would say. And I, as I said, have some ideas myself about this. If all of the students had voted that they didn't want the course, I would have felt some feelings about that. But I was sort of secure enough in my view of what's valuable about this kind of learning experience that I wasn't, I mean, I was excited, but I wasn't really scared that I would be outed as a sort of illegitimate waste of resources. I mean, as I said, I certainly would have not felt great if they had all decided that that was the case. And as I was thinking not only about what had happened in the course, but also how I wanted to write about it, it's the sort of classic, I guess, academics perspective of like, well, it depends, like the truth, in fact, is complicated. And I think that's part of why the article seems to be resonating with a lot of people, is that it's not really coming to any hard-hitting conclusions so much as it is presenting a range of ideas and experiences and letting people kind of figure out what they think. And I myself have finished, this semester, I've written the article and I'm going to teach the course again, and it might have a totally different outcome. So I think that the sort of pose of, or posture of just curiosity is one that I wanted to try to model in the essay, because that's really what the course was all about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Piers. Yeah, what you just said really came out in your piece, and especially this idea of nuance, that it's not just either or. All those other pieces are like just trying to create what I also think is a false narrative, as well as this false reality, just to get clicks. And I just felt like throughout your piece, your piece definitely said it it does depend. And that's what young people and students are saying, to older folks too. And it's just so great that you wrote it, in that manner. And it's just so wonderful also to hear from young people, you, Cam, and Max, about your experience. So Cam, can we start with you as far as like, so did you sign up for this class knowing what you were going to get into? Like, do you remember the first questionnaire? Like, how was it at the beginning? And what were some of the things that you felt like you learned along the way?
I truly had no idea what I was signing up for. I think course registration goes, you get the class you get, and honestly, you're just grateful at that. I had a friend that had Professor Gelly last semester and completely said that he was a great professor. So going into it, I was very excited. Come the first day, I believe that's the one we got our first assignment. It was called Looking Through the Window. And immediately, Professor Gelly gave us that creative freedom, which I had never had before in any high school class. It had been very structured. You go from point A to point Z and you don't cross those lines. And for the first time, I was just given point A, and it was like, okay, now fill in the rest like the way you want to. And I'd never done that before. After the second class, I believe, I went up to Professor Gelly and I was like, this is the best assignment I have ever had in my life. I have never had this much creative freedom, and I can truly tell I'm going to enjoy this class. I didn't know it'd be so much based on AI as it was, which I loved because I don't think AI is talked about enough. We are given a policy at the beginning of each class and told you cannot cross this line and this is where you go. But then you see people using it, and then that line gets really, really blurry throughout the semester. But as far as the rest of the class went, it was honestly one of the best experiences I've ever had. And I'll recommend this class to anyone, just because even throughout the class, I believe in other classes, you're told what you should be thinking, and like you're taught something very narrow and straightforward. And in this class, it was completely up to your opinion and what you believed, and you decided for yourself on the way, which is something strange. I went to class and I was allowed to have different opinions than the person next to me, which was very interesting to say the least, because I heard very interesting opinions from all of my peers. But this class as a whole truly changed the way academics looks for me in a way. It gave me more creative freedom. And truly just confirmed that I am allowed to have my own opinions and that I am allowed to grow with my academics, and honestly changed my perspective on AI. I believe in the beginning survey that we did, I said I used it almost on every single assignment. If it wasn't I never used it to write my stuff for me, but I used it to edit and make it sound more professional and fix the grammar and things like that. And as the year went on, I truly saw how faulty AI was, especially with that one example in class we did where we all submitted our own essays, our own voices, but then asked it the same instructions that Professor Gelly had given on an assignment. And although the meat of every single essay was different, it all sounded exactly the same because AI uses the same language every single time, which I'd never known had I not taken this class. And hence that reason, I do not use AI anymore.
Yeah, that's amazing, Cam. And by the way, readers and listeners, Cam is actually in the article. It's the same person, right? Same thing with you, Max, too. You're also in the essay. And so, Max, you had sort of like a different story, but can you share sort of like your first impressions? Especially like, do you remember the questionnaire, the pre and post at the beginning and the end, and then sort of how you came into the class and then sort of how you changed?
So I guess I ended up in the class because I'm not good at following instructions. At UVA, what first year students are supposed to do is take these English writing requirements by their last name. So if you'll notice, Cam's last name begins with a V, and people whose last names begin with the first letter of the alphabet are technically supposed to take their English writing requirement classes in the first semester, as my last name starts with a G, and I did not do that. There was no repercussions, but Professor Gelly, I'm sure, can tell you that my name was definitely a bit of an outlier on the attendance sheet. I think it was the only one that started before L. So in that way, I was already kind of taking an unusual route. They don't, in the kind of course registration website, there's almost no information about each English writing class because there are so many of them. I think they're capped at maybe 18 students. So you have dozens of them and they all kind of look the same when you're signing up. So I just picked one because it was at the time I liked. And I think it maybe said something about exploring technology. And I was like, well, that's going to be good enough. And then I think in the early part of the course, like Cam said, we had a lot of freedom, but the assignments themselves were not exactly linked to AI. I feel like that stuff didn't come until kind of the second half of the semester. So that to me, the first few assignments were actually a lot more what I expected from a kind of college English class, the stereotypes about broadening the mind and those kinds of phrases that are often used. But then the AI stuff was really when it became very interesting experiences. I'm sure we're going to talk about. In terms of the questionnaires, I certainly remember the calculator question as something that really stood out to me, that the idea that AI in an English class could be akin to a calculator in math class. And I mean, I read a very long and detailed comment on Professor Gelly's article explaining why that was not the case. But from an intellectual perspective, instead of a like computer perspective, to me, at the beginning, I was like, no, that really can't be the same thing. It's a calculator is a lot less of doing the thinking for you. But at the end of the course, I really thought that my perspective had changed on that. And as Cam said, differences of opinion, while she found that her trust and maybe not reliance, but certainly use of AI declined over the semester, I actually found that maybe not my trust of it, but certainly my willingness to use it in certain situations increased. So I think that summarizes my takeaways pretty well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the calculator because I think about it all the time, also at the high school level. And it's definitely a very interesting analogy, to talk about. And so do you remember the whole calculator thing too, Cam, and sort of like what you thought about it? Because I think that folks who are actually doing it, students in high school and college, are actually sort of working out the nuances of AI, when to use it, when not, the morals of it versus not, should you use it to brainstorm or not? And it's not, just like on a syllabus as far as like you can't use it. But do you remember also sort of like some of your thoughts about this metaphor or analogy that AI is like a calculator?
I do. I remember Professor Galley bringing it up or someone in class bringing it up. And I just sat there. I really did. I pondered on it for a long time. And I think even now, I still can't give you an answer on what I truly think about the whole situation. Because in its own way, yes, a calculator is given to you at a certain time, but then it's also taken away. You're told when you can use it and you're told when you can't use it. Just like AI, you're told when you can use it and when you can't. However, the actual components of what a calculator and ChatGPT can do are I feel completely different things. You can also ask AI to work as a calculator, and it could do that too. I think it is a lot more powerful, and it's something that we don't fully understand yet, and maybe won't ever fully understand. So I think that's where I sit in that analogy. I still don't know my answer to the real question yet, but that's what I think.
Cool, thanks. And then I read in the piece that the students, like you, were all sort of talking about how AI writing is sort of like bad food. Like there were a lot of eating metaphors, apparently, that it was flavorless, it was bland. I want to ask you, Piers, because so I taught, a class last year where I got to a point where some of the writing, it made me nervous as to sort of like, what was I reading? And was it written by a human or not, or in between? And then over time, I was like, well, this is sort of like what writing is at this point. I was like trying to get away from this binary of it's either a human or a student. So I guess I wanted to ask you, especially during this class, when you did know or you didn't know, who wrote or what, how'd you feel reading some of your students' writing?
Well, in the writing that students turned in for credit, I was generally pretty sure that they were using their own voices. And I say that because I guess I had gotten to know them over the course of the semester and kind of knew what they sounded like and didn't, which is why I was able to accurately, the three gentlemen who are mentioned in the essay who had used AI in their final projects, to argue that AI was unnecessary and that human writing was valuable, this sort of strange position they took. I could tell when they were using AI because it just didn't sound like them. I think the broader question of like in the wild, so to speak, either in my sort of habitual reading or I guess in future semesters, if I'm having this experience of, is this human? Is this AI? It's a hard one. I mean, the problem with assuming that you can always tell if something is written by AI is that sometimes you're going to be wrong. I had a student in my fall semester of last year named Abby. Hi, Abby, if you're listening to this, who wrote this beautiful essay about in high school, her teacher accused her of using AI to write an essay, and it was wrong. I mean, I'm believing Abby here, but I have no reason not to. She was falsely accused of using AI, and it was terrible for her because not only was she sort of brought into this kind of disciplinary machinery, but also to be told that you don't sound like a human, that your organic voice sounds inhuman, that's not a good experience for anybody. There was another experience that I didn't write about in the essay because I felt that Max's example did a pretty good job of this. But I had a student who, the exercise we were doing was that we had a bunch of essays written by students within class. All but one of them were written by students. So it was a kind of odd man out who used AI assignment. And everyone identified this essay written by Will. Hello, Will, if you're listening. And everyone was like absolutely sure that Will's essay was written by AI. And then when the big reveal came, it was Jaime. Hello, Jaime, if you're listening, who had used AI. And Will's essay was just written by Will. And so everyone was like, this is so bland and flavorless, these words students like to use. I'll say here that I had doubts that Will's essay was written in a way that, used good grammar, which Will often did. And it used the word doldrums. He was describing his first couple months of college and saying he felt that there was he was in the doldrums. He was feeling kind of like down. And the students in the class were like, well, no student would ever use the word doldrums. And I was like, well, actually, having read Will's essay, his writing, I think that he might use this word. To me, doldrums isn't so much a fancy word as it is a kind of whimsical word. Like, I don't know if Will has read The Phantom Tollbooth, but I suspect he has. The doldrums is a word and a concept that plays a big role there. So I think, I read that and my guess was that actually every student had written it themselves. That was what I submitted as a guess. And it turned out that I was wrong. But the idea that student writing, real writing, has to sound a certain way, it's ultimately going to create some errors. And I mean, every student writes differently. If I'm doing my job right, all 18 essays in the class do sound notably different. Some students like a kind of clean prose style. Some students, I use em dashes all the time. I mean, this is a thing that comes up in the essay that AI doesn't, that uses em dashes and students don't. But I love em dashes. I mean, I probably use some in my emails with you, Mark. I mean, Max and Cam, I've emailed with you separately. You've probably seen em dashes in my emails. They're nodding. It's my favorite punctuation mark. And so if we start to say, well, this is definitely a sign of AI and this is definitely a sign of something being quote unquote real, I just think we're creating a sort of impoverished sense of what language actually sounds like. And so that's what's tricky about it. And as AI gets better, it's going to be more and more difficult to rely on, telltale signs that something is AI. And it's going to be more and more our job as instructors, well, I don't know, to create situations where if we want students to be making a choice not to use AI, we just have to make that choice as compelling as possible, rather than assuming that we can kind of police our way out of this. That's kind of my take on it now. But the funny thing about all this is that, a couple months from now, things will be different. They just released ChatGPT 5, the latest version of it. I haven't played around with it too much because I have a newborn child. But my sense is that already the things that we are depending on to identify AI as AI writing are starting to shift. I wouldn't be surprised if the M dashes start to disappear. So yeah, it's kind of tricky. I mean, it creates a sense certainly of confusion, and you don't want to be the person who's incorrectly accusing a student of having used AI. But there's also this question, and Mark, you probably have thoughts about this too, that like maybe in a writing class, our job is to really push students and say, no, you shouldn't use AI. And I know because it's good for you, and I'm your teacher, and you got to eat your vegetables. Like it's not a role I'm often comfortable inhabiting. Like as Max and Cam's comments have probably demonstrated, I really do like to let students figure things out for themselves. But it's this question of, how comfortable are we taking on this paternalistic, I'm literally a father, this paternalistic role with regard to our students, and saying you have to do it a certain way. Is that an effective way of changing somebody's mind? Is that an obligation we have in this day and age? Or do we really just have to accept that things are changing and adapt to the times? I don't know. And I think that kind of confusion hopefully comes up in the essay. And it's certainly still on my mind when I next sit down to teach this course. I'm going to have hopefully some new thoughts about this. Hopefully I'm building on past experiences, but it's a real moment of uncertainty for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, you speak to what I think all of us are also thinking about is like, what is the role of the writing teacher, as well as what is writing for? And also this notion of transactionalness, and different students have different goals, as you also talked about in your essay. And I also appreciate that you talked about that one sort of experiment where it was sort of like, which one is AI? Because I feel like in your piece was sort of like how you teach, which is like a playfulness and experimentation, and also bringing in students on sort of like this game, and also this deceit a little bit, which I feel has led even to more trust between you and your students. I mean, obviously you have two students here who are not even taking your class right now, early in the morning, like talking to us. So like, it just really speaks to like how you have built the trust on something that like AI is actually maybe making trust harder. And so like, I just wanted to appreciate that. And you did speak a little bit about one of the biggest parts of the class where it was Max's essay. And Max, I want you to speak to it. Do you like, apparently it led to something in the classroom where everybody was shocked. And so can you share a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, so this was, I think it was maybe March. We had kind of progressed. We'd all, I don't know if we'd submitted our midterm essays yet, or if we were still in the process of revising them. But the assignment that we were given was, it seemed kind of mundane. We were split up into groups, and we were told to pick one person in the group's like intro narrative, which was how the essays were structured, and then see what AI could make with it. And we didn't. One of the things that we talked about in class was this idea of like iterating and asking AI. You give it one thing, and then it'll give you something back, and then you iterate. You work with it over a period of multiple steps. We did not do that. We just fed it right in and asked it to create its own version. I think at 500 words or whatever. And on the first try, it produced the paragraph. And we were in a group, and we had picked mine, and it was just I was shocked. Like, it was like, oh wait, this is actually really good. So we didn't feel like we needed to iterate. I guess I would have still at that point told you it would have been pretty easy to identify, just because especially with a place like UVA where everyone goes there, but the AI bot doesn't go there. It's ideally kind of easy to identify when it's just kind of making things up. But again, I don't know if it was just luck or if it was the sign of the times, but it did a really, really good job of making it sound like it was really there. And the part that I think captured Professor Gelly's attention the most was the so-called meet cute at the end, where it's like, the AI bot invented this whole section where I like met an older girl who was like helping me out and saying I was like part of the UVA community. And I think that, everything in that essay, I mean, it was based similarly on an experience that I really did have, except there was no older girl. But the whole experience was something that it was based on something that did happen to me, and it was something that could have happened to me. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, there wasn't any magic involved. It was something that could have really happened. And I think that it was well written, and it seemed to kind of, the whimsical nature of it did seem to come through, I think, as we touched on already. And I don't know, I did think that people would identify it as AI. I'm not sure exactly what I thought would make it obvious, but what I thought was interesting was that we presented them side by side, the thing that I actually wrote versus the version that the AI wrote. And the AI version was better. I mean, it obviously wasn't real because none of the things happened, but it was better. And that was scary to me because, I feel like I was proud of what I'd written, and it was a story that, because it actually happened to me, it meant something. And to see the AI kind of cook up a alternate version of it and that was better in just basically a couple of seconds was, that was alarming. And then when we did the guessing, everyone immediately kind of went on was like, oh, this one with the too many clunky references to 1917, there's like all these things about trench warfare. AI obviously wrote this, and I was just sitting there, and it's like, oh man, it actually fooled them. And then Professor Gelly was the final straw and as he said so well in his piece, I wasn't happy about that. I guess I wanted people to identify correctly what I've written, and that's not what happened. So I think, it was interesting to read about Professor Gelly's reaction in the piece about how it was almost too good of it was too cliche in a way that we were expecting a romantic comedy of some sort, and this like whole it was so easy to digest because we had things like it before. I think that was really telling, and I think that was the moment for me that I fully appreciated the value of the course. That was we could have done nothing else for the rest of the semester, and it would have been worth it from that.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing, Max. It's very interesting how you said in the moment it was a scary experience for you. It seems like it was a transformational piece, not just for you, but also for the class. And then Cam, I mean, you were there too, but then also throughout, you said earlier that you changed your mind a little bit on AI. I would feel like maybe not necessarily to put words in your mouth that you were scared, but it feels like you had some emotions about AI over time too. You at the end were on crutches, and then Professor or Piers is talking about like AI as a crutch as well. And it seems like it has transformed you too. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't really know much about AI or just the power that it had. I kind of just used it in my assignments. Submitted my writing in a ChatGPT, said make the sound better, fix the grammar, make it longer, make it shorter, whatever I needed, it did it in seconds. And then as the course progressed and we started doing more hands-on with AI and working in groups or working on our own, and our homework assignments became around AI, it's when I started noticing the faults it had, which I didn't think it could have faults. I was like, it's AI. Why could it ever be wrong? But no, it does. I will say though, Max's experiment or that experiment that we had to do, it left me more shocked than anything. I was like, there's no way it could write that. I remember the reflection that we had after that. I said something along the lines of, it sounded too human-like, which I talked to Professor Gelly about this, but I was like, AI will never replace humans because it can never sound human-like. And here I was wrong because it did in fact sound very, very human-like. It added emotions to this girl that didn't exist that Max fell in love with. Like, I was like, oh, that's definitely Max's writing. And like you mentioned previously, his own writing had a lot of history components to it. And I think the class as a whole was like, what teenage person our age is going to know a lot about history? I should have guessed it. It's Max. He loves history, but it had me fooled for sure. And that was definitely just a moment where I was like, oh, maybe AI isn't that faulty. So I definitely went back and forth throughout the semester in different experiences. But the experience for me that truly solidified everything for the course was, I think I mentioned this before, but the experiment we did where we all had different essays, but it submitted the prompt that Professor Gelly had told us to submit. And although they all talked about different things, it sounded exactly the same. And that was truly all I needed to not only know that AI is faulty, but the language it produces is going to be the same every single time, regardless of what it chooses to write. Max, what exactly did you prompt into chat when you asked it to write that essay for you? Professor Galley, I don't remember if we wrote our own script for chat or if we used one that you'd already written.
Are you referring to the one where it's different titles or the snowball fight introduction?
The snowball fight.
I think what I had you guys do was you'd already written your midterm essay, and I had you return to the first paragraph of the essay and in a line or two ask it to write that paragraph. So for Max, it would have been something like write a 300-word paragraph in the first person from the perspective of a college student who went to a midnight snowball fight and got hit in the face and got a bloody nose from a snowball. And so I think you were tasked with summarizing what you had written and kind of giving the AI of your choice enough information to produce something like what you had written. And the way I phrased it to you was, could you have done this with much less effort and time? You've already done the work, right? But what if, right? What if you had instead used AI? How would the results compare? I think that was the sort of parameters of the assignment. So from what I remember, I wasn't giving you language to use so much as it was like a gesture, right? It was like, let's take what you've already done and see if you could have gotten it more easily.
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you. And I think what makes chat so compelling to people our age is how quick it is. Especially as college students, time is the last thing that we have with clubs here and class here and homework here and sports here. You just insert something into chat and it truly does it for you. But I think this course really gave me that sense of what really goes on behind the picture, what's actually being produced, and not just, oh, let me just copy paste this and submit it here.
Thanks so much, Cam, for that. And I think that actually leads beautifully into my last question. First of all, thank you so much for your time. So starting with you, Cam, okay, so now what are your next steps with sort of like how you use AI or not? And then also, if you want to, any sort of tips for educators or students, especially like say for high school or college? Like, what do we do now, basically?
Going forward into this next school year, I do plan to not use chat at all to even assist me in my writing. Like I mentioned before, I am a college student, and as time goes on and I get less time from just my schedule becoming so hectic, will I fall back onto it and use it as a crutch like I did this year? I'm not so sure. I know the dangers of AI writing and just what it lacks and really what it can't sound human-like, truly. So I don't know, we'll see. And then tips to educators. I think something that truly changed the game for me was giving me the freedom to, I think being told that AI is bad is one thing, but truly seeing it for yourself is a completely different story. And even just maybe using that example in class with your students on the first day, let's all write something completely different and give it the same prompt, and then have each student read their essay out loud. That will leave them shocked for sure.
Thanks, Cam. What about you, Max?
So I would say, I mean, again, Cam and I had different experiences, and I think we're going in different directions. I don't plan to use it for everything, but I do think that in certain situations where permitted, of course, I will use AI probably maybe not more often, but I feel like I have a better sense of the uses of it. There was a final paper I had at the end of last semester for a different class that I would have liked to use AI to help me revise, except I wasn't permitted to. And I think that that navigating those kinds of challenges is going to be key. It's one thing to be able to use it and to have the freedom to use it like we did in Professor Geller's class, but not everyone's going to see that way. So being able to have good intentions and use things when you're permitted to, and for things that you're allowed to use AI for. In terms of advice I would give to educators and students, I think that for both, as Cam alluded to already, AI, like, it might look good when it's just your piece of writing, but if everyone is using it, all of those pieces of writing are going to look very similar. And suddenly it's going to be very easy to tell who used AI. I think that also I would say maybe for more educators is that just to be clear with students about what AI capabilities are, don't try to just like shut it down and shut it out, because unfortunately people aren't going to listen. That's not really how life works. Trying to over police it, I don't think is going to get anybody anywhere. I will say that even for the 3 students in our collective group of classes who still used AI in their final essays, that's the kind of thing where as the student, you need to take a little more like find a little more way to make that creative or something so that you might be able to use AI, but you're also integrating your own thought instead of just kind of putting it on there. So that's, I guess, my takeaways.
That's great. Thanks, Max.
Bart, can I ask a quick follow-up question to Cam and Max?
Yeah.
Your question and their answers got me thinking. I mean, you guys are probably aware that, much of the country, when it's not talking about, certain other things that are happening in the background on the national political scale, there's this ongoing conversation where people are really tearing their hair out and trying to figure out, how to think about AI, and in particular, how to think about young people who are essentially living through an enormous lab experiment. Like my class was an experiment, but the experiment I'm talking about is one that's being run kind of somewhat deliberately, somewhat incidentally on young people who are going through school, going through high school, going through college, and having this opportunity to use AI for their writing and various other forms of thinking. And then, we'll see, right? In the future, we'll see how it all turns out. I am part of the generation where, the Facebook algorithm was tested on me because I started using it in something like 2006, 2007. And now people are like, there's actually some downsides to letting kids sort of marinate in, the algorithm when their brains are still forming. And I wonder, as people who are not sort of participating in this discourse, but in fact living through it, you're not opining in the pages of the New York Times about what AI is or should be. You're like living through it. How do you receive, like, there's some people who are super panicked, some people are super optimistic. When you look at how people talk about this, how does it differ from how you and your peers think about it? Like, are you guys telling each other behind closed doors, oh, I found this new way to make AI sound not a lot like me, you got to try this? Or are people actually having conversations like, oh, like AI is actually bad, you shouldn't use it? I guess this is just me wanting to like hear what's going on that I'm never actually going to hear in class as a professor now that you're not my students. Like, how do you see all this? Are the people who are alarmist right? Are the people who are, yes, you should adopt this right? What's your view on the way we tend to talk about AI, us adults?
I mean, I think it's a tough question to answer. Over the course of last year, I saw like kind of a wide variety of uses for it. I would say the thing that concerns me most is people who use it for everything. And I don't just mean like coursework, but things like planning their schedules and seeing at questions and having it do like basic problems. I think that people need to be able to do some of that on their own, even if it's just even again like what the cost is. There's also like my perspective of like the environmental issues with it, which I think is something that we didn't really talk about in class, and honestly that's okay because I feel like that's a whole different side of this that is a lot like trickier to figure out, especially given like what, as you said, what's been going on in the political scale. So I think the way that people talk about it though is just that I think that people, it's very like does the ends justify the means? And I think I would say people use it kind of transactionally as a way of like, I'm not going to question it. I don't have time to do this assignment or do whatever. I'm just going to have AI do it. And then that's it. We move on. And that's the end until the next time. And so I think that if you're asking if there's like deep conversations going on, I wouldn't say so, but maybe Cam has different experiences.
No, truly, I agree with everything that Max just said. I think we're moving on from I'm going to bring up the crutch reference one last time, but I think we're moving on from using it as a crutch and more so as a wheelchair. Like, we're truly just taking it everywhere we go. I recently went on a trip with some friends and someone would just say something and they're like, oh, ChatGPT can do that. Just put it in chat or ask chat. Or like Max is saying, we've moved on from just using it in the academic world to using it all of the time. I have a friend that uses it as a Google now instead of actually just searching something up and reading through articles and things. And even in class, we saw this now, but when you look something up on Google, the first thing that pops up is Meta AI, and it's not just articles that you read through anymore. So as we keep moving forward, I think it's consuming us even more. And is that something to be scared of? I think everyone has differing opinions. I am still terrified of it, but I mean, some people might not be. And I think we'll never really know where it's going to go because technology changes every single day. And like you just said, AI 5 just came out, something like that. it progresses every day. So there's no clear end on what's going to happen.
Oof, Cam, the
Th-
moving from a crutch to a wheelchair, that's gonna sit with me.
That
Oh my gosh.
No,
me,
that's what happened. I mean, that is what's going on.
yeah, me too, Cam. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, we don't know, as you say, we don't know what's next. And thank you, Pierce, for asking that question. And because like college students and high school students are actually living it instead of just opining. So, Cam, thank you so much. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. And Max, when you just said people need to do some of that on your own, like, yeah, maybe we need to live life a little bit on our own. Thanks for that as well. And Pierce, thank you for writing this piece. And we're going to just totally gobble it up and discuss it. And it's just, I want to say again, it's just wonderful to have a different approach, instead of this either or thinking. So I just want to thank you all for this rich discussion. We could go on for a while longer, but thank you so much for saying yes and being part of Article Club.
Thank you. This was a great experience. I loved it.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much for inviting us and also for highlighting the piece. It has, more than many things I've published, generated a lot of interest. And I think the fact that you are gathering people to talk about it and talk through it and have whatever contradictory responses they might have to it. I'm just grateful that people are interested. And I guess I would say also to anyone, I've had a bunch of people who teach reach out to me to ask about the class or the syllabus. And I would invite anyone who's interested, like I'm happy to share materials or best practices. The context of UVA is different than other schools, like it would work differently, not to say better or worse in other contexts. So if people are interested in trying some of this out, hopefully one thing you'll get from listening to this is a recommendation from two students who are real. They're not AI voices. I guess you'll have to trust us on that. But that two real students saying that some of this worked for them, which I consider the highest praise, that they were glad they took the course. So thanks to Cam and Max for being great students as well, and for agreeing to join me on this podcast. Now that I have no sway over your academic outcomes because I already gave you your final grades.
I want to thank Piers Gelly, Camille Villalobos, and Max Goldberg one more time for generously coming on Article Club and having this conversation. And I want to thank you, dear listener, for really taking in this interview. If this conversation intrigued you and you want to join our discussion on September 28th, there is still room. All you need to do is go to highlighter.cc/discussion to sign up. One more time, thank you so much for being part of Article Club, and I hope you have a great weekend ahead.